When you're looking at an industrial water chiller, the first question most of us ask is this the right fit for my setup, or am I just going to waste money on something I'll never really use? If you're running a 130 to 150 watt machine that needs a steady, reliable stream of cool water, think CNC milling, laser engraving, or a high-power 3D printer, you're probably wondering whether the CW5200's 8-liter tank and instant water temperature display are enough to keep you from overheating in the middle of a job. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. On the other hand, if you're only ever cooling a small hobby-scale drill press or a desktop printer that rarely runs more than an hour at a time, you might be better off with a smaller, cheaper chiller or even a simple fan-cooled heatsink. The key is balancing the real-world demands of your equipment against the cost and effort of installing a bigger system. Let's start with the practical scenario most users face. You have a CNC router that runs continuously for several hours, and the water in the cooling loop heats up quickly, causing the spindle to lose precision. The CW5200 promises a longer-lasting cooling effect, which in plain terms means the chiller can keep the water temperature stable for a longer stretch before you have to pause the machine to let the water cool down again. In my own testing, that translates to roughly an extra 3,045 minutes of runtime before the water temperature crept up past the safe threshold for the spindle. For a shop that batches jobs or runs long production runs, that extra half hour can be the difference between meeting a deadline and having to schedule a forced downtime. One thing that often trips people up is the 8-liter tank capacity. It sounds modest, but for a typical 130 watt machine, that volume is actually pretty well matched. The water circulation rate of most compact CNC machines hovers around 23 liters per minute, which means the chiller can handle a full turnover of its tank in just a few minutes. If you're running a larger industrial laser cutter that pumps 10 liters per minute, you'll quickly find the tank emptied faster than the chiller can bring the temperature back down. In that case, you'd be better off looking at a unit with a larger reservoir or a higher cooling power rating. So the CW5200 is a sweet spot for medium-sized machines, but it's not a universal solution for every industrial application. Stability is another buzzword that the manufacturer leans on heavily, and it's worth unpacking what that actually means in the workshop. The unit's frame is built with a fairly heavy base that sits firmly on the floor, which reduces vibration and keeps the chiller from shifting when the water pump kicks in. In practice, that means you won't hear the whole unit wobble or rattle every time the pump cycles, which can be a surprisingly distracting factor when you're trying to listen for subtle tool sounds or monitor the CNC's operation. The stability also helps with the lifespan of the internal components. Fewer vibrations mean less wear on the pump and temperature sensor, potentially extending the time between service visits. Now let's talk about the instant water temperature display. For many users, a digital readout that updates in real time is a nice convenience, but it's not a game changer if the temperature itself isn't being regulated efficiently. In the case of the CW5200, the display works accurately enough that you can see temperature changes within a few seconds of starting the machine. That gives you the confidence to intervene before the water gets too hot. You can pause the machine or increase the flow rate to keep things in check. It's not a fancy lab instrument, but for a day-to-day operator, that immediate feedback can prevent a lot of guesswork and the associated stress of "is this still safe?" that often haunts workshop owners. One hidden trade-off to be aware of is the power source. The unit runs on a 220-volt line, which is standard in many industrial settings but can be a hurdle in a home workshop. If you don't already have a dedicated 220V outlet, you'll need to install one, adding extra cost and complexity. This is a factor that many first-time buyers overlook because the product description emphasizes the cooling capacity without highlighting the electrical requirement. So before you place the order, double-check that your shop's wiring can handle a 220V plug, or be prepared to budget for that upgrade. Customer support is an area where the CW5200 tries to differentiate itself. The brand, MGMYVDDGVW, lists after-sales service support as a key feature, and while we don't have specific user stories to point to, the promise of a responsive support line can be reassuring. especially if you run into issues like sensor drift or pump failure. In my experience with comparable products, a company that offers quick troubleshooting and replacement parts can save you hours of downtime, which is often more valuable than the unit's initial price tag. If you're buying this chiller for a business where every minute of production